My mother, Vivian, was in her element. Her face was flushed with a glow I hadn't seen since her own wedding album. She raised her glass, the crystal catching the ambient light, making it sparkle. "To Harrison and Amelia," she announced, her voice a little louder than necessary, ensuring everyone heard. Harrison's wedding was perfection. A ripple of agreement went around the table. My father, Arthur, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Harrison, the groom, squeezed Amelia's hand, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Amelia, always gracious, offered a soft, "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes." If this story is resonating with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing the video to help me grow better. Then my mother's gaze, bright and piercing, landed on me. It felt like a spotlight, suddenly hot and inescapable. "Absolute perfection," she repeated, her eyes lingering for just a beat too long. The implication hung in the air, a silent judgment that compared my unadorned life to Harrison's grand spectacle. And then the laughter started. Not a gentle titter, but a full, booming wave of mirth that swept across the table. It wasn't directed at anything in particular. Not yet. But it felt like a prelude, a warming up for the main act. My stomach tightened, a familiar knot of dread twisting inside me. I gripped my water glass, my knuckles white. Cousin Devin, never one to miss an opportunity to jab, leaned in, his voice a stage whisper that carried perfectly in the suddenly less hushed room. His eyes glinting with a malicious amusement. "Found mine." "So, Eleanor," he sneered, drawing out my name, making it sound like a punchline. "When's your turn?" The question, so innocent on the surface, was a loaded gun. It was designed to expose, to highlight, to humiliate. And the family, always ready for a good show, ate it up. The laughter intensified, a chorus of chuckles and guffaws. Aunt Brenda, who had been engrossed in her lobster bisque, looked up, a knowing smile on her face before returning to her soup. Even my father, Arthur, usually so stoic, allowed a small smirk to cross his lips. It was a fleeting expression, but I saw it. It stung. It confirmed that he was part of this unspoken agreement, this family tradition of putting me in my place. My sister Julia, sitting opposite me, covered her mouth with her hand, but her shoulders shook with suppressed giggles. She always sided with the pack. It was safer that way. My brother Harrison, the man of the hour, just watched. A faint, almost imperceptible tilt of his head, as if observing a fascinating insect. He didn't intervene. He never did. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, a blush of shame and indignation. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. Next to me, Devin leaned closer, his voice dropping to a theatrical, conspiratorial tone. Still waiting for Mr. Right. Ellie, don't worry. There's plenty of fish in the sea. Even if they're all swimming away from you. He punctuated this with another laugh. A harsh, grating sound that felt like sandpaper on my soul. I could feel eyes on me, judging, pitying, or simply enjoying the spectacle. I knew what they were thinking. Poor Eleanor. Always the odd one out. Always single. Always just Eleanor. My mother. Surveying the scene she had, in essence, orchestrated, wore a look of triumphant satisfaction. She loved these moments. She loved the control, the ability to direct the family narrative, to cast me in the role of the perpetual wallflower. I felt a surge of defiance, a spark of something hot and angry in the pit of my stomach. I looked down at my plate, at the perfectly seared salmon I no longer had any appetite for. My hand, still gripping the water glass, trembled slightly. It was then that I noticed her. Amelia, Harrison's new wife, usually so poised and calm, was sitting stiffly. Her eyes darted around the table, a flicker of discomfort in them. Then, almost imperceptibly, she slid her left hand under the napkin resting on her lap. I saw the glint of gold just before it disappeared. Her wedding band. She was hiding it. Why? Was it out of sympathy for me? Or was it to distance herself from the cruelty, to show that she wasn't part of this mean-spirited game? Whatever her reason. The small gesture burned quietly. A tiny ember of truth in the midst of so much calculated mockery. It was a silent acknowledgement that what was happening was wrong. And in that moment, for the first time that night, I felt a strange sense of power. They thought they had me cornered, exposed, ridiculed. But they didn't know the half of it. They had no idea how much I had already rewritten the script they so desperately tried to control. The truth was burning, not just quietly, but fiercely, within me, and it was about to explode. Growing up, our house was a shrine to Harrison. His achievements weren't just celebrated, they were immortalized. The mantelpiece in the living room wasn't just a place for decorative items. It was Harrison's personal hall of fame. Trophies for Little League, then for academic excellence, then for debate club, lined it up like soldiers. Each one gleamed under the soft lamplight, a testament to his brilliance, his effort, his innate superiority. My parents would point them out to visitors, their voices swelling with pride. This one for the regional science fair. My mother would gush, tracing the curve of a golden statuette. And this, his MVP trophy from high school football. I, on the other hand, had a different relationship with accolades. My artwork, vibrant and messy and full of the raw emotion of a child, never made it to the mantle. It didn't even make it to the fridge door, usually reserved for things deemed cute or interesting. Instead, my carefully drawn pictures, my clumsy pottery pieces, my hand-stitched creations would find their way to a dusty corner of my closet. They were shoved into an old shoebox. Forgotten. Unacknowledged. Sometimes I'd pull them out and look at them, trying to remember the joy I felt creating them. But the silence from my family around them often overshadowed that memory. It was as if my creative expressions were too loud, too unrefined, too me. And being me, it seemed, was not something to be put on display. Holiday letters. The annual ritual of updating distant relatives and family friends were another clear marker of our different statuses. My mother, Vivian, would spend weeks crafting these letters, carefully selecting the most impressive details of our lives. They were essentially annual reports on Harrison's triumphs. Harrison excelled in his AP courses, securing a scholarship to State University where he plans to major in pre-med. Or, Harrison's internship at the law firm was a resounding success. He's already being considered for a permanent position. His successes were detailed, itemized, and celebrated with a fervor that bordered on obsessive. My name, when it appeared, was a vague footnote. A hurried, almost apologetic addition. Eleanor is still teaching second grade. Doing well. Or, Eleanor continues with her art hobby. Keeping busy. It was always about what I was still doing or what I was keeping busy with. Never about what I was achieving or what I was passionate about. My life was compressed into a single generic sentence. Easily overlooked. Easily forgotten. It was never about my students' progress. Never about a particularly challenging art piece I finished. Never about the quiet satisfaction I found in my own small victories. It was just a placeholder. Proof that I existed. But barely. I learned early that invisibility was survival. It was a coping mechanism. A way to navigate a family where I was clearly not the favorite. Not the chosen one. If I didn't draw attention to myself, I wouldn't be scrutinized. If I didn't voice my opinions too loudly, I wouldn't be dismissed. If I didn't try to compete, I wouldn't lose. It was a quiet agreement I made with myself. Stay in the shadows and you'll avoid the pain of being constantly compared and found wanting. But invisibility came at a cost. The cost was being erased. Not just from the holiday letters or the mantelpiece, but from their perception of who I was. They didn't see my quiet strength, my dedication to my students, my passion for art, my carefully cultivated inner world. They saw a blank space, a vague outline where a daughter should be, filled only by the absence of Harrison's brilliance. I remember one Christmas. I was probably 10. Harrison had just won a local science fair, and my parents had bought him a brand new, expensive telescope. His eyes glowed as he unwrapped it. A genuine, unadulterated joy that was beautiful to witness. He spent the rest of the day in the backyard trying to find constellations. My gift that year was a set of plain watercolor paints and a pad of paper. It was nice. Don't get me wrong. But it was also practical. Something to keep me busy. No fanfare. No shared excitement. My mother simply said, "Oh, good. You'll have something to do." My father barely looked up from his newspaper. I went to my room, sat on my bed, and started painting. A vivid galaxy full of swirling colors and distant stars. The kind Harrison would see through his telescope. I wanted to show it to them, to share my interpretation of the universe. But then I stopped myself. What would they say? That's nice. Dear. Perhaps with a distracted pat on the head. Or worse. Compare it to Harrison's precise, scientific understanding of the cosmos. I tucked the painting away into the shoebox in my closet, where it found its rightful place among the other uncelebrated pieces of my soul. This pattern continued through my teenage years. Harrison's college applications were a family project. His interviews discussed in hushed, serious tones. My decision to go to the local state university for an education degree was met with a shrug. Practical, my mother said, but not exactly ambitious. My ambition, the quiet fire within me, was to make a difference in children's lives, to foster creativity, to be a beacon of warmth. But that wasn't the kind of ambition they understood or valued. Even seemingly mundane interactions highlighted the divide. At family dinners, the conversation almost always revolved around Harrison. Harrison, how's your new project at work? Harrison, did you hear about the promotion at your company? When I tried to interject to share a funny anecdote from my classroom or a new technique I learned for painting, the conversation would quickly pivot back. My mother would say, "Oh, that's nice. Dear. But Harrison was just telling us about..." And then, just like that, I was erased from the present moment. I remember once I was telling them about a particularly challenging student I had. A child who struggled with reading. But who, with a lot of patience and creative teaching, finally started to bloom. I was so proud. I watched my parents' faces, hoping for a spark of interest, a hint of understanding. My mother nodded vaguely. My father cleared his throat. Before I could finish, Harrison, who had been quietly eating, interjected. Speaking of challenges, my firm just landed the XYZ account. It's going to be a massive undertaking, but the visibility alone will be huge. And just like that, my story, my small triumph, was swallowed by the grand narrative of Harrison's life. They didn't even seem to notice. Or maybe they just didn't care. The silence around my life became a heavy blanket, suffocating and isolating. I learned to anticipate it, to prepare for it, to even, in a strange way, embrace it. It became my armor, a shield against the constant reminders that I was less, that I was not enough, that I was merely a shadow living in the dazzling light of my brother. I built a world inside myself, a rich tapestry of thoughts and feelings and dreams that I knew they would never see, never understand. And in that hidden world, I was the protagonist, not a footnote. But still, the longing for their acknowledgement, for a moment of shared pride, remained, a persistent ache beneath the surface. I just stopped letting it show. The cost of visibility, I had decided, was far too high. The air was thick with anticipation. It was spring, and wedding announcements seemed to be fluttering out of every mailbox. Harrison had proposed to Amelia during Christmas, and the news predictably had been met with an outpouring of excitement from my parents. Calls were made, photos were shared, and Vivian immediately launched into full wedding planning mode. I heard snippets of conversations, florists, caterers, guest lists, venues. It was all very grand, very public, very Harrison. I waited. I knew the date was set for early summer. I saw Amelia's excited posts on social media, images of dress fittings and cake tastings. My mother would call me sometimes to relay an update, usually about some new impressive detail of Harrison's wedding. The band is incredible. Eleanor. So expensive, but worth it. Everyone will dance. Or, Amelia's dress is a designer original. Simply stunning. I would listen, offering appropriate oohs and ahs. A polite smile fixed on my face. Even though I knew the conversation was merely informational, not truly inclusive, I kept checking the mail day after day. A part of me, the hopeful, naive part, still believed that despite everything, I was family. My brother was getting married. Surely his sister would be invited. I imagined a beautifully embossed envelope, a formal card with my name on it, signaling my official place at this monumental family event. I pictured myself there, maybe helping Amelia with her veil or sitting at a table with other relatives, enjoying the celebration. A small, quiet fantasy, but a persistent one. Weeks turned into months. The wedding date loomed closer. Still no invitation. My mailbox remained stubbornly empty of anything beyond bills and junk mail. The hopeful part of me began to shrink, replaced by a growing sense of dread and then a familiar cold ache of rejection. Finally, I couldn't bear the uncertainty anymore. I decided to bring it up to my mother. It was during one of her routine calls where she was detailing the exact shade of ivory for the tablecloths. "Mom," I interrupted gently, trying to keep my voice even. "About Harrison's wedding. I haven't received an invitation yet." There was a brief pause on the other end. A tiny moment of silence that stretched into an eternity. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. A silence filled with unspoken judgment and calculated omission. Then my mother's voice. A little too bright. A little too dismissive. Cut through the quiet. "Oh, Eleanor. Honey," she began, her tone laced with a faint concern that grated on my nerves. "Harrison and I thought you'd be too busy with teaching." Too busy with teaching. The words hung in the air. A flimsy, transparent excuse. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was an invalidation. My job, my passion, my commitment to my students was being used as a convenient reason to exclude me. As if my life outside of family events was just a series of burdensome obligations rather than a fulfilling career. "Busy," I repeated, my voice tight. "Mom, it's a Saturday in the summer. I'm a teacher, not a brain surgeon. And even if I were, I'd make time for my brother's wedding." She sighed. A long-suffering sound. "Well, we just assumed. You're always so independent. We didn't want to bother you." Independent. Another code word. It meant unattached, unimportant, easily forgotten. It meant I wasn't part of the core unit, the inner circle. It meant they didn't really want me there, and they were trying to frame my exclusion as a kindness, a consideration for my busy schedule. So, you didn't send me an invitation because you assumed I was busy? I pressed, the anger bubbling up, making my voice tremble slightly. You didn't even think to ask. Eleanor, don't make a fuss, she snapped, her faint concern melting away, replaced by irritation. It's Harrison's day. We don't need any drama. And there it was. My mere inquiry about an invitation was drama. My hurt was a fuss. My existence in their narrative was an inconvenience. The conversation quickly devolved. She talked over me, reiterated that it was too late now anyway to add me to the guest list, and implied that I was being selfish for even bringing it up. She ended the call with a curt, "We'll send you some photos. Darling, you'll see how lovely it was." As if photos could replace presents. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking. The silence in my apartment felt immense, suffocating. The reality of it hit me with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had deliberately chosen to exclude me. They hadn't just assumed. They had decided. The wedding day arrived. I tried to distract myself. I went to the park, read a book, even tried to paint, but my mind kept drifting. I knew what was happening. The ceremony, the reception, the grand family gathering, and I wasn't there. Then the flood began. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications. Social media, everyone was posting. Cousins, aunts, uncles, family, friends. My mother, of course, was leading the charge, sharing a curated selection of the day's most beautiful moments. I scrolled, my heart sinking with each picture. Harrison and Amelia beaming, my mother looking regal and proud. My father with a rare, genuine smile. Julia laughing with other cousins. It was a perfect, sun-drenched day full of joy and celebration. And then I saw it. The family portrait. It was taken on the sprawling green lawn of the venue with the grand building in the background. My parents stood in the center, flanked by Harrison and Amelia on one side and Julia and her husband on the other. Behind them, a semicircle of aunts, uncles, and cousins, all smiling, all perfectly posed. My eyes scanned the faces, searching, desperate. A tiny, irrational part of me still hoped I might magically appear. A phantom in the frame. But I wasn't there. Not even a hint of me. It was a beautiful picture. A tableau of a happy, united family. A family without me. The caption beneath it, posted by my mother, read, "Our beautiful family celebrating Harrison and Amelia's special day. So much love." The words felt like a knife twisting in an old wound. Our beautiful family. It was a clear, unambiguous statement. I was not part of their family. Not in this crucial moment. Not in this visual representation. I was an outsider, an absence, a ghost. My parents hadn't just excluded me from the guest list. They had erased me from the family portrait, from the public record of their joy. It was a stark, undeniable confirmation of my status, the shadow, the footnote, the daughter who didn't belong. The pain was sharp, raw, and utterly devastating. I closed my eyes, willing the images to disappear. But they were already etched into my memory, a permanent reminder of where I stood. Or rather, where I didn't stand in the story of my own family. 6 months earlier, the world had felt different, not less painful. Perhaps, but certainly more hopeful. 6 months earlier, I had married Ethan Miller. Our wedding was nothing like Harrison's grand spectacle. There were no florists, no caterers, no guest lists, and certainly no designer dresses. There was just us. We chose the Multnomah County Courthouse, a sturdy, unassuming building in downtown Portland. It felt right, solid, and real, without any pretense. The morning of our wedding was crisp and clear. A typical late autumn day in the Pacific Northwest. The sky was a soft, pale blue, and the air had that refreshing chill that promises a bright day. I wore a simple knee-length cream dress. Nothing fancy, but it felt special. Ethan wore a charcoal suit, one he already owned, but he looked impossibly handsome, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled at me. We didn't invite anyone. It wasn't because we wanted to exclude our friends or other family members. It was a mutual decision born from a desire for intimacy and a quiet rebellion against all the external pressures I had felt my entire life. We wanted our vows to be just ours, unburdened by expectations, free from judgment. We wanted to start our life together in a way that felt authentic to us. After the brief ceremony inside the courthouse, where a friendly, no-nonsense judge pronounced us husband and wife, we walked hand in hand to the nearby waterfront. The Willamette River flowed by, calm and steady, reflecting the pale sky. The distant bridges arched gracefully, connecting different parts of the city, much like we were now connected. We found a quiet spot by the river, a small patch of green grass shaded by a weeping willow. There, with the gentle lapping of the water as our soundtrack, we exchanged our personal vows. They weren't grand pronouncements, but quiet promises, heartfelt and true. Ethan looked into my eyes, his gaze steady and full of love, and spoke of partnership, of shared dreams, of building a life together where I would always be seen and cherished. I, in turn, spoke of trust, of unwavering support, of creating a safe harbor for our future. There were no photographers, no poses, no staged moments. Just the two of us speaking from the heart. The quiet breeze rustling through the leaves above us. It was perfect in its simplicity, perfect in its sincerity. It was exactly what I had always longed for. A moment of pure, unadulterated connection, entirely mine. Afterward, We celebrated with a quiet dinner at a small, cozy Italian restaurant. We toasted our future with sparkling cider, laughing softly, the joy of the day radiating between us. It was the antithesis of everything my family valued in a celebration and precisely what I needed. It was my wedding, my choice, my beginning. A few days later, Ethan, always thoughtful, suggested we send a photo to my parents. They should know. Eleanor, he said gently. Sensing my hesitation, it's important. I chose one of the few photos we had taken with Ethan's phone. A simple selfie of us by the river, beaming, our faces close, the sun catching the new gold band on my finger. My eyes in the picture held a genuine light, a happiness that felt foreign and exhilarating. Ethan's arm was around me, a protective, loving embrace. I slipped the photo into an envelope along with a short handwritten note. Mom and Dad, Ethan and I were married quietly on date. We're so happy. Love. Eleanor. I hesitated for a long moment, hovering over the mailbox, before finally dropping it in. A small act of hope. A fragile offering of my newfound joy. I waited for their response. A phone call. An email. A congratulatory card. Anything. I imagined my mother's initial shock. Perhaps a touch of disappointment that it wasn't a big, showy affair. But then hopefully a flicker of happiness for her daughter. I pictured my father's stoic nod of approval. A rare, good for you, Eleanor. The days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. No response ever came. The mailbox remained empty. My phone remained silent. My email inbox received only work-related messages and spam. It was as if the letter, the photo, the news of my marriage had simply vanished into the ether. They didn't acknowledge it. They didn't comment on it. They didn't even express disappointment. Just silence. A vast, echoing, chilling silence. It was the most profound form of dismissal. It wasn't just that they didn't celebrate my marriage. They actively chose to ignore it, to pretend it hadn't happened. My joy, my significant life event, was not worthy of even a single word. It was as if I had merely sent them a grocery list. The initial sting of it was sharp, but over time, it solidified into something cold and hard. It became another brick in the wall I was building around my heart, protecting it from their constant neglect. Ethan, seeing my pain, held me close. He didn't try to minimize my feelings or offer false reassurances. He simply listened. His presence, a quiet comfort. They didn't even say anything. I whispered to him one evening, the words thick with unshed tears. Not one word. He stroked my hair. They're missing out. Ellie, he said, his voice gentle. They're missing out on seeing how truly happy you are. His words were a balm, but they couldn't entirely erase the hollow feeling. My wedding, my intimate, beautiful moment, had been met with the same profound indifference as my childhood artwork. my teaching career, my very existence within their sphere. It was another confirmation that in their eyes, my life, my choices, and my happiness held no real significance. By the time Harrison's wedding rolled around, the silence around my own marriage had become a heavy shroud. It was a secret. Not because I wanted it to be, but because my family had refused to acknowledge it. And as I sat at that post-wedding dinner, enduring Devon's cruel jibes and my mother's beaming pronouncements about Harrison's perfect wedding, the weight of that silence was almost unbearable. They thought they knew my story, the narrative they had crafted for me. Single, overlooked, waiting for my turn. But they had no idea. They had no idea about Ethan, about the river, about the quiet vows. They had no idea I had already claimed my turn in a way they could never comprehend. The truth, tucked away like a precious secret, was mine alone. For now, the laughter around the table had reached a crescendo, fueled by Devon's increasingly pointed remarks. He leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face, clearly enjoying being the center of attention as he continued to mock me. My mother's smile was fixed, almost painted on, radiating approval. My father, Arthur, had settled back into his usual stoic silence, but the faint smirk I'd seen earlier had faded, replaced by a kind of passive acceptance. Julia was still giggling, covering her mouth as if embarrassed. But her eyes, when they met mine, held a strange, calculating glint. Harrison simply watched, his expression unreadable, a silent observer in this cruel family ritual. My heart was still pounding, but the raw pain of a few moments ago was slowly being replaced by a cold, steady fury. The casual dismissal, the blatant mockery, the assumption that I was still the same invisible, easily ridiculed Eleanor. It was too much. The silence from my parents, their tacit endorsement of Devon's behavior, was the final straw. It was a confirmation that they saw me as an open target, a disposable character in their family drama. I looked around the table at all their faces, their joy, their comfort, their self-satisfaction. It was all built on a foundation of my invisibility, my perceived failures. They had curated a story for me, a narrative of perpetual solitude, of waiting, of inadequacy. And they were all so invested in it. But they didn't know. They hadn't seen the quiet courthouse, the flowing river, the genuine happiness on my wedding day. They hadn't heard my vows or Ethan's. They had chosen to ignore it, to erase it. And in their ignorance, they had given me a kind of power, the power of a secret waiting to be unleashed. The quiet power I felt from Amelia's hidden wedding band. The small gesture of empathy solidified my resolve. She saw it. She saw the injustice. And that small acknowledgement from an unexpected source was enough. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in my lungs. My hand, which had been gripping the water glass so tightly, relaxed. I placed it gently on the tablecloth. I looked Devon directly in the eye, my gaze steady, unwavering. The laughter was still ringing in the air, but to me it suddenly sounded distant, muffled. "It's already done," I said, my voice clear and calm, cutting through the din like a perfectly tuned bell. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Every head at the table turned toward me. Devin, still smirking, raised an eyebrow. "What's done?" "Ellie finally got that library card application filled out," he sneered, clearly expecting another round of easy laughter. But I didn't flinch. I held his gaze. Then slowly, deliberately, I shifted my eyes to my mother, then my father, then Harrison. My voice, still calm, still steady, resonated with a quiet authority I didn't know I possessed. "I married." The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The laughter, which had been so raucous just moments before, collapsed into stunned silence. It was as if someone had abruptly cut the music at a wild party. The air, which had been thick with mirth, suddenly became impossibly heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Forks midway to mouths froze. A piece of bread, forgotten, dropped from Aunt Brenda's hand and hit the plate with a small, echoing clink. Glasses about to be raised were lowered slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile quiet. Harrison's wife, Amelia, who had been sitting stiffly next to him, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her eyes, wide with surprise, met mine for a fleeting second. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A confirmation of empathy. Perhaps. Or just the shock of the revelation. My mother, Vivian, her triumphant smile frozen in place for a beat too long, finally managed to let it melt away, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Her mouth hung slightly open, her eyes darting between me and my father, as if seeking confirmation or an explanation. The flush of pride that had colored her cheeks just moments ago drained away, leaving her face pale. My father, Arthur, usually so composed, looked genuinely blindsided. His eyebrows, usually furrowed in a perpetual state of contemplation, shot up. His jaw tightened, and he slowly, almost imperceptibly, put down his knife and fork, his hands resting flat on the tablecloth. He stared at me, a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps a flicker of respect, or maybe just confusion. Devin, the instigator of the mockery, looked like a fish out of water. His smug grin completely vanished. His eyes, usually so full of malicious glee, were now wide with genuine shock. He stammered, "You what? Married to who?" The sneer was gone, replaced by a baffled incredulity. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was a silence filled